So Cloud9 just announced picking up Stewie as their fifth player moving forward. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. It had been a very polarizing pickup, obviously in public opinions. If you go to the Reddit thread, it's craziness over there. It's a very high risk, high reward pickup, just with the amount of skill that Stewie has as an individual player. And a lot of people have been questioning why Cloud9 would pick him and choose to pick him up. And I thought, when I was thinking about it, I kind of drew a lot of similarities to a previous point in time. Back in July of 2014, Cloud9 did the same exact thing with Shroud. So I was kind of looking at those situations. So, I mean, looking back on that, at the time they picked up Shroud, I was actually still competing in the North American scene in the Invite division. And even at that time, the community and most of the pros were doubting that pickup, saying Shroud was an onliner, saying he's a pug star, saying he wouldn't be able to find success at LAN. A lot of the same similarity of things that are being thrown at Stewie right now. At the time, Shroud was really only known as a streamer. When he got picked up, he'd only played one season of Invite, just one. It was with a team called Manajuma that had, infamous D-Born was part of it, Irakanji was part of it, and Desi was also on that squad. They'd had a lot of pickups. That fourth and fifth spot for that team had been rotated in and out a couple different times throughout the season. He'd even attended a couple small lands, not really done anything too major. I think there were a couple lands in Canada that he went to. And this was ESEA season 16 before Pro League was even around, but it was the Invite division. So he goes to this Pro League season 16 with Manajuma. That was really his first test against top tier competition. And going into it, there were a lot of rumors that Cloud9 was going to be, scouting him, scouting Desi. They were looking to pick up a fifth, and it was going to be one of those two was kind of the rumor. So it's actually kind of interesting at that land. They opened up and they played Nip and Navi and they just got wrecked. But Shroud didn't play particularly all that well. He went 13 and 20 against Nip on Nuke in an 8 to 16 loss. Went 17 and 19 versus Navi in a 12 to 16 loss. But Cloud9 actually still picked him up over Desi, even though Desi had the better statistics at that event. And part of that was because Cloud9 looked at Shroud and they saw potential. They liked his decision making, they liked his positioning, and they said, okay, if we can develop this guy, if we give him more experience, we like how he's playing the game. But if we give him more time to develop with good teammates, those frags will come. The frags aren't the issue for them. They saw how stellar his aim was, how pinpoint and precise it was. They just liked the decision, so they wanted to give him time in that team to develop. And I think in long term, they're probably very, very happy with how that turned out. Despite some of his recent struggles, long term, you have to say that was a good pickup for the risk they put into it. And that's very, very similar to what's going on right now with Stewie. The only real major difference is that Stewie has even less experience than Shroud did. Hasn't played a season in Pro League quite yet, despite being at the top of Premier this past season. Hasn't really attended too many lands. I think he's attended the RGN, and there was that Northern Arena in Toronto. At RGN, he was playing at a pug with Mo and Steel, and they kind of bombed out in groups. Northern Arena, they got out of groups, but this was a really, really small land. Even North Americans didn't really keep too much track of it. The only other main teams that were there was CLG was there, Complexity was there. And I think Method was there as well. And actually this time, Stewie was there with his team Splice. They made it out of groups, but they lost to CLG in the semis. But the real thing that Cloud9 sees in him, and what a lot of people have seen in him, he's been talked up for some time, is just his insane individual skill. In 10-mans, in FPL, even before FPL and the 10-mans that pros were playing in North America, he's been dominating. At times there are matches where he just single-handedly carries the match. His individual skills at a really, really high level, which is where, that's the environment that shines him. So he's proven with this individual skill that he can not only compete, but he's actually superior to a lot of the players currently on professional teams. So that's kind of where Cloud9's making this decision. It's another high-risk reward. And, the NA scene is really, really starved right now for those kinds of players that can just explode on an individual talent basis and take over entire matches. So that's kind of what they like out of Stewie right now. They just want to give him that opportunity to the one that gave Shroud, back, a year and a half ago, whatever it might be, is they want him to develop. They want him to get experience playing with established teammates, that they have so much experience on that team, and then see if he can develop into something really, really special, develop him into a player they can use moving forward. It's often overlooked that we oftentimes look at the deficiencies in players that we see competing, and we really focus on those. But when you put some of these players on teams, when you put them in a different environment, sometimes you can see them really work on improving those deficiencies. Sometimes it gets masked by a teammate. Sometimes the way they can play with their teammates makes them individually better because that teammate fills the gap in their own play. So that's kind of what they want to hope, what Cloud9 hopes to mold Stewie into moving forward. And on this team, it's kind of interesting because obviously with the departure of Sean, you'd think they'd want to pick up some kind of in-game leader, because rumor has it they're going to have nothing doing that moving forward. They want to pick up some kind of tactical mind, but they haven't gone that route. So if you look at the roles on this team, what you'd expect Stewie to do is kind of take more of closer to an entry role or a second man in role behind Freakazoid. You can't really expect nothing to do it because he's going to be calling. And I think as an inexperienced caller, you want nothing to be in that lurking role where he can play a little bit more passively, bide his time and choose his moments and choose when to communicate what he wants done. And also you can't expect Stewie to go in and say, you're going to be the lurker. We're shoving you into Pro League, which you've never done before. We expect you have the game sense to be an effective lurker. So you don't want to put him in that role consistently. So I think really that they're going to have to put him into that entry, that second man, a more of a frontline role. And there's two ways with that position that I think they can be really effective with it on their Terra sides especially. The first is if they're going to do some kind of decisive, like hard-hitting, execution-based tactic, you put him like on the hip of Freakazoid. You try and establish Freakazoid and Stewie as kind of the duo that Liquid has with Nitro and Elige. So, you send Freakazoid in first, obviously. You send Stewie in second with them, and they work together. Stewie trades that first kill if Freakazoid can't get it, but they just get hyper-aggressive. This allows who's ever behind them, like Shroud, Skadoodle with the AWP, they get to sit back, they get to grab intel based off that aggression, they get to hold angles, they get to cover one side of the bomb site or one side of the choke point that they're trying to take over, and they can really use the distraction and aggression of Freakazoid and Stewie to find some good kills, to find some good intel and move in from there. The other way is, you separate him and Freakazoid. So, if you do like a more slow-paced map control-based strategy, and, you're trying to take control of two things, you can really use Stewie as kind of the point man, gear him up with Skadoodle, gear him up with Shroud, and have him be the point man to try and take over some minor map control. Push back in offense. Let Stewie get up there, get into some action. Maybe he doesn't get a kill. Maybe he doesn't die at least. You use him to kind of lead the charge. So you have Shroud, you have Skadoodle, you have these established players alive into the late round situations. But Stewie's a guy who, if he gets comfortable getting aggressive in these kind of situations, he can be very impactful. Maybe he gets one kill and trade it off, but you still have that map control. So they can really use him as a point man or a second guy. I think the biggest struggle tactically that Stewie's going to have on this team comes onto the CT side. And it's important to note that I think no matter who they picked up, Cloud9 was going to struggle very, very much on their CT sides. But especially here because Stewie's a little bit more inexperienced, I think Cloud9 is going to be forced to give him spots on maps. I think someone's going to have to give up their spots on map to give Stewie his favored position, just to make him a little bit more comfortable. Just to, get him some early success. Make sure you're not, putting too much on his plate to get used to adjust to. On top of that, I think he's going to have to anchor a bomb site, at least initially. Maybe not on every map, but I think you make him anchor a bomb site because that game sense, that adjustment that he has to make to the pro level. I mean, these, even in North America, the jump from Premier to Pro League is so much more punishing. You have to make the correct decision very, very quickly. And if you put him into a rotation role, I think that lack of game sense at the professional and even at the international level, I think you're really going to see him start to struggle a little bit with it, with trying to think so much. This is a team that is going to, without Sean there, they no longer have that tactical mind that's going to be able to read their opponent's strategy. So they're not going to have as many early jumps on rotates. They're not going to be able to read things in time. You're going to have to make very, very good decisions on rotates. And I think Stewie would just struggle a little bit too much in that. So definitely anchor the bomb sites, I think, initially for the most part. But I talk about his insane talent. You have to remember this is still like a very high risk. This isn't a short-term pickup. They're looking for this to pay off in the long run. And I think there's three really, really big obstacles that he's going to face in improving to the level that they expect him to. The first one, despite all this talent, it's mostly. I mean, this one's kind of obvious if you've watched him stream, seen some FPL. It's a little bit of the attitude and mentality that he carries forward. He has shown a little bit of a cocky attitude, which is okay on its own, but at times it's kind of manifested in this full blown, a little bit of an over ego. The first red flag, the main red flag actually, is how he ended his time on his last team, which was Follow Esports at Splice, where he slept through a match. I mean, just showing a little bit of irresponsibility in terms of his team. That shit won't fly with Cloud9. But just even not only just that, it was the Twitter back and forth with Peter, just showing a little bit of immaturity. So that's going to have to be shown up, and I think that's where maybe being teammates with Freakazoid, who's like kind of an emotional leader for Cloud9, is going to help out. But he has to kind of check himself a bit here now in this pickup, because he's going to have a lot of eyes on him, and he's going to have a lot of learning to do. A lot of adjustment, and he needs to be ready to study maps. He needs to be able to study demos, study his own gameplay, figure out what's working and why it's not working, or what's working and what's not working and why it's not working. I think also a big part of the problem with that, with his mentality and his attitude, maybe a little bit of an ego, is comes down to us in the community, and I kind of partially almost blame myself a little bit, because he's been talked a lot as this up and coming player. I mean, he's had very quick success. He spent 2 seasons in Open, 2 seasons in Premier. All of a sudden, he's in Cloud9. That's a very quick jump to make, especially based largely off pug results and your performance in like FPL and 10 mans and everything. And when you're getting talked about so much as the next up and coming player, this guy with insane potential, you're naturally going to have a little bit of an ego. But I think that is going to have to get checked just a bit as he learns to adjust in a Pro League next season. The second big obstacle, I think, is the fact that, like I mentioned, most of this success, most of what everyone's basing in this pickup is based off of, has been on his success in pugs, and in 10-mans, and in FPL. It's not based off his performance in matches or official tournaments. It's based off, what they've seen individually in these pugs. And there's a big difference doing well in pugs and then being able to translate that into doing well in matches. And it's not something that I'm confident that he's got down quite yet. I remember specifically playing against him in a 10-man, having him wreck us on a map where he was just, rushing through smokes, getting quick flanks, just taking huge gambles, probably dropped 30 kills on us. And we go to the next map, and this is kind of, and like, he did the same thing to start the match out. Just ran through a smoke, wrecked us a little bit. And I remember sitting, being dead, and he was dead as well. And I was just like, Stewie, you're supposed to be this like next up and coming player. You're supposed to have all this potential. Like, play like it's a match. Start getting the experience. Start making the same decisions you're going to make in a match. Like, don't play like you're in a pug. Play like you're at a tournament. Because that's the thing. When you're these new players coming up, you have to play like every match, is a championship. And you always play when you're practicing. You always play like you're down, 0 to 10. And I told him that. And moving forward into that pug, he was like, "Okay, I'll do it." And he only got like 3 or 4 kills for the rest of the match. So it was, that's kind of that's a small one, but that's a little bit scary. Even bigger is in Premier. He really struggled in the Premier finals against Denial, where for the most part of the season he was just kind of beating up on lesser talent. And when he got to this team that had the talent of a Pro League team, he went 14-19 in a 10-16 loss on Cobble, went 9-19 on a 5-16 loss on Overpass, and they lost the final in 2 maps. He really didn't perform that well. It was very, very underwhelming, and that's kind of just a scary thing. And especially in Pro League, you have to find a way to translate your talent into, an overall team strategy. You have to find a way for your talent to be effective within the framework of the team and of tactics. And I don't know if he's quite got there yet, especially in the Pro League. I think he's going to have a real big trouble, maybe struggle a little bit early on, adjusting to that early on in the season. The third big obstacle is actually not really too much to do with him. It just has to do with Cloud9, because they're in a massive identity crisis, in my opinion. And it's fortunate we haven't seen them play in some time, because I think this loss of Sean is really, really going to hit them hard. With Sean at the helm as the in-game leader, they were a tactical team. They played, very intelligent anti-strat based Counter-Strike, which had a lot to do with reading opponents. And that was all done by Sean. All the research, all the calls, everything. We've heard the POV streams from the summer when they were dominant. So much of that came from Sean. Without him, it's scary. Like, they don't have anyone else to pick up that slack. It's going to have to be players like nothing, essentially, because you got to imagine just based off how we know the personalities, Shroud and Skadoodle aren't going to be the ones doing it. It's going to have to be nothing, and maybe Freakazoid. They're going to have to be the ones to put that time in. So I think going into the season, no matter who they picked up, but especially with Stewie, they're going to have a lot of stretches of the season where they look disorganized, where they look a little bit confused, stretches and matches where they just get beat up. Won't be quite as bad because they're going to be against North American competition. But that's a very tough situation for a new teammate to come into, much less a new teammate who's also new into Pro League. So he's going to have massive adjustments during these periods where Cloud9 is going to be struggling a little bit adjusting to life without Sean. And that's going to take a lot of focus on his part and a lot of dedication to improvement on his part and on his teammates' part. A lot of it's going to come down. I think Skadoodle's going to, he's very notorious on the CT sides, especially of not being very mobile with the AWP, not being very communicative, not communicating very well. And that's going to have to change. That's going to have to put a lot of strain on him. Obviously, nothing's adjusting towards more of a leadership role in game. So there's a lot of adjustments all at once going around for all the individuals in Cloud9 and them as a team. And just this pickup for a lot of people, for myself a little bit included, was underwhelming. I mean, I like the high risk, high reward. This is actually a pretty cool one to see how it's going to progress for me. But I've also been torn on it because I'm waiting for more from Cloud9, because with this kind of a pickup where, I've highlighted the struggles that Cloud9 might go through without Sean, and with him being such a new player, he doesn't have a mentor on this team. No one's going to, there's not someone on this team that you really think is going to take him under his wing and kind of teach him the tricks, teach him, help him out, help him make this adjustment. Freakazoid's going to be a great emotional leader in terms of, making sure he's working hard and making sure the attitude is always positive. But, he doesn't have anyone who's going to be like, this is a play that works in Premier, but it doesn't work in Pro League. Stop doing it. You need someone like that at a certain point. And if they don't have it, it's going to be all on him. And that's going to come down once again to his own self-focus and self-motivation. But outside of that, there's no one tactical on this team. So I really think that for this pickup to have like the most promise of being really successful, they have to have some kind of a coach or an analyst. And I've been saying this about Cloud9 for a year, even with Sean on the team, someone to help them out. And they haven't got it. So now they're in a position where they lose Sean, they bring in this new player, and they have no tactical or strategic infrastructure on this squad for Counter-Strike. They don't have anyone who's known for watching demos. They don't have anyone who's really going to be, coming up with new and fresh tactics or ideas. So that's a little bit scary for Cloud9, overall, not just in terms of this pickup. One way that I see this pickup actually being very positive, and this is very broad and general in terms of the entire North American scene, is that look at the entire scene in general right now, because we've had it's one of these NA shuffle periods, but TSM's rebuilding a new roster. We don't know who they're getting. CLG's looking for a fifth. Complexity still hasn't announced that, they're going to be using those two new fifths. Method just broke up. So there's all these teams. I mean, there's more organizations rumored to be looking at starting rosters and lineups and coming into the North American scene. And all of a sudden, Cloud9 has picked up probably the highest skill ceiling player we have that's not currently on a roster. They've all of a sudden taken this player who every organization was probably like, yeah, that's a good risk to take for an unestablished org. This is the first guy we'd want on it because of the potential of all this skill. And all of a sudden, Cloud9's taken that bullet away from him. And then moving forward, even if this doesn't pan out for them, and 6-7 months down the road, they're like, all right, this isn't working. We need to go a different route. Maybe we're changing more than Stewie. But all of a sudden, they have this player that every organization has looked at, and everyone knows he's got a huge skill ceiling. He still has potential. Just because he's not working out in Cloud9 doesn't mean he's not working out for us. He doesn't have that stigma of long-term struggles. All of a sudden, Cloud9 has his contract, which has a buyout onto it. So Cloud9 hasn't paid anything for him, but they can get something in return if things aren't working out. So I thought that's kind of a cool positive for Cloud9, just based off the situation that we have the North American scene in right now. But overall, I like this pick if Cloud9 is going to pick up an analyst or a coach, which I think they absolutely have to, because you have to imagine that even with this pickup, Liquid's taken a step forward ahead of them. You got to think right now that Liquid in 2016, I mean, they still have to prove it, but you have to have the feeling that Liquid's going to be the better squad, at least initially. And also probably they've got CLG, who's still looking for a fit. That's going to be knocking on the door. They still retain those four core, so it's not going to be too hard for them to insert a player and kind of keep chugging forward. The new Optic lineup, the longer that they play together, they can keep improving. We have to wait and see if they're going to improve and if they can consistently compete at this level. But I know a lot of people think that Optic's actually better than Cloud9 as it stands right now, especially after this pickup. People still believe Optic to be better. So Cloud9 need a coach, they need an analyst. But overall, this pickup is pretty cool to me. It's just with it being so high risk and high reward, we're not going to be able to judge it until a couple months down the road. We have to give Stewie his fair due. We have to see if he can reach that potential, if Cloud9's going to be able to integrate him into their lineup and help him reach that potential. So it's a tough pickup to judge right now, and they really absolutely do need to pick up a coach or analyst if they want this to be successful, in my opinion.